"These are people who take no prisoners," mutters Nico. Gert grimly nods his head. What we're going to look at next concerns Dr. Wouter Bassen's arrest for possession of 1,000 ecstasy tablets, and indications that perhaps his alleged drug smuggling activities and certainly his other activities, including perhaps a perpetuation of the biological warfare research program, this program may very well have been perpetuated, or at least its capabilities perpetuated by the Third Force. The Jacomet referred to here is Jürgen Jacomet, J-A-C-O-M-E-T, a now deceased Swiss intelligence operative who worked with Wouter Bassen. He also appears to have worked with Larry Ford. He worked with Project Coast, and he is convinced that Bassen's drug activities could only have been an extension of Bassen's activities on behalf of the Third Force. And as we're going to see here, it would appear that the capabilities of Project Coast have fallen into the hands of this Third Force. After discussing the arrest of Wouter Bassen on January 29, 1997, for possession of 1,000 ecstasy tablets, the authors ruminate, so what was Bassen up to that night? He says simply that he was framed. Another version has it that he did it purely for personal gain. There is a third explanation, that it was a mixture of personal gain and helping to raise funds for the Third Force, of which Bassen is considered to be a member. Bassen's possible connections with the Third Force were elliptically referred to by Jürgen Jacomet, the former Swiss military intelligence agent who worked with Bassen on money laundering aspects of Project Coast in Europe. When we met Jacomet, he was suffering from a serious facial and neck cancer. He had elected to go beyond conventional treatment and was in the hands of a private healer in the Philippines. Despite this serious illness, he remained a cheerful man, philosophical and optimistic, a good friend of Bassen's and of the old regime in South Africa. While in London on business in 1998, Jacomet was formally interviewed by officers of MI6 in room 114 of, appropriately, the Sherlock Holmes Hotel on London's Baker Street. They too wanted information about Bassen, the biological warfare program, and Jacomet's role in the whole affair. According to Jacomet, he told them virtually nothing. In fact, back in the mid-1980s, the Swiss agent had first worked with General Lothar Neethling, Neethling, South Africa's police forensic chief, delivering arms to South Africa in an extensive sanctions-busting arrangement. And again, I may be mispronouncing that man's name. Perhaps it's Neethling. Neethling introduced Jacomet to Bassen, and the two men became friends. Bassen often visited Jacomet at his Bern home. Eventually, Jacomet traveled to South Africa on several occasions to help Bassen and Neethling in the dirty wars of the 1980s. Now, sitting in a quiet West London garden on an early spring day in 1998, Jacomet relaxes with coffee and cigarettes and discusses the arrest of Bassen and the ecstasy allegations. He scoffs at the prospect of his friend being a profiteering drug dealer. Quote, "It makes absolutely no sense if you know him. It makes no sense that he would mix with street dealers, and if it happened at all, there must be a higher interest," unquote. Such as, quote, "It might be to procure money to support a certain group which represents the interests of South Africa and wants the return of a white-dominated government," unquote. Jacomet, now nervous, is pressed to expand a little. "There is a group of people here in London," he says. "One could call them the Friends of South Africa. They have it in mind to see a strong white South Africa again. There are American connections, too. They need funds, and it is possible that the drug business has helped them. You know, it would be really foolish for me to talk more about this. They are serious people," unquote. Jacomet searches for the popular expression and remarkably finds the same aphorism used by Gert about the same people. "They don't take prisoners," he says finally. Who are they? Jacomet mentions some well-known South African names, men previously associated with Third Force activities. He also refers to an American name known to Britain's MI5 for his alleged involvement with Bassan in money laundering, sanctions busting, and biological agents procurement. By the way, this might very well be the aforementioned Dr. Ford. Once again, the Organisation is mentioned in respectful tones, and once again, the details remain scant and elusive. Yacomet remains silent, and he died months later of the cancer. It transpires that MI5 officials also take the Organisation very seriously. By the way, MI5 is British intelligence. Earlier you heard a reference to MI6. That's British foreign intelligence. Continuing. It transpires that MI5 officials also take the Organisation very seriously. They hold details of a small group of once powerful South Africans and/or ex-Rhodesians who have residential rights in the United Kingdom, but who share a community of interest in the future of South Africa. The men comprise a closely knit group which would welcome and might be prepared to help the return of a traditional white government to the Republic. These men are not political fanatics, nor is their political motivation sufficiently visible to make them liable to closer supervision. Nevertheless, they remain a troubling point of political focus for Pretoria, where both the National Intelligence Agency and the Ministry of Defense also take them very seriously indeed. The relationship between the Organisation and Bassan is indistinct but troubling. Events after his arrest quickly confirmed that Bassan was not merely an alleged drug dealer. There was much more to it than that. And indeed, it would appear that the Third Force connections of Wouter Bassan continue to this day. And I would note in that regard that Larry Ford, again, was described as being part of this international network of white supremacists looking to return the apartheid era to return apartheid or pro-apartheid forces to power in South Africa. And chillingly, the account provided by Peter Fitzpatrick was that Gideon Bauer, the South African trade attaché with whom he had worked, had discussed the possibility of using some of the biological warfare weapons against some of the apartheid era, some of the apartheid regime's enemies, and in light of the connections between the apartheid regime and what I call the Underground Reich, and connections between the Underground Reich and elements within our own political and national security establishments, and within our own paramilitary establishment, so to speak, the possibility that elements associated with basically fascist or white supremacist elements in this country with connections to the national security establishment and with international connections to what I call the Underground Reich and perhaps the Organisation, Third Force, Spider Network, whatever term one chooses to apply to the apparently formidable network known to people like Nico Palm and Gert and Jürgen Yacomet, the possibility of some of those elements using some of the toys developed by Larry Ford and others under the Project Coast program and perhaps utilizing them against the United States or elements within this country along the lines of a serpent's walk scenario is not one that I would too readily dismiss. We're going to take a look now at some excerpts of an article from Foreign Affairs magazine's issue of January and February of 2001. This article was authored by Laurie Garrett, and it's called The Nightmare of Bioterrorism, and it discusses some of the paramilitary right wing and what Ms. Garrett describes as postmodern fascists' interest in utilizing biological warfare for their own purposes. In a section called Budding Bioterrorists, Laurie Garrett writes as follows. Although most people remain ignorant of the issues raised in that scenario, handfuls of internet-hooked extremists, right-wing militia members, psychologically imbalanced belligerents, and postmodern fascists are well-versed in the fine points of bioterrorism. Recipes for producing botulinum and anthrax are posted on the web. Books describing biological warfare assassination techniques are readily available. Some private militia groups train to use biological weapons. Indeed, law enforcement leaders claim that religious cults and militant political groups are the most likely to engage in biological terrorism. Skipping down. Perhaps it is the tone of some militants' rhetoric that sparks the most concern. In The Poisoner's Handbook, for example, Maxwell Hutchinson suggests that readers poison or kill Internal Revenue Service workers by filling out phony tax return forms and lacing them with a mixture of ricin, a poisonous protein, and dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO, a concoction Hutchinson claims is 100% lethal. The purpose of all this is to disrupt the operations of the IRS. Hutchinson writes, again quoting, "If done on a large scale, it would serve two purposes. It would make it more difficult for the IRS to operate efficiently, thus helping tax cheats and tax protesters. It might also awaken the politicians to the depths of the resentment felt by the tax-paying public," unquote. Fortunately, Hutchinson is a lousy chemist. Only simple chemicals, not proteins such as ricin, can dissolve in DMSO. But the depth of Hutchinson's antagonism is unmistakable. He suggests that readers kill Catholics by soaking their rosary beads in phytotoxin abrin, a toxin derived from a rare bean. He writes that botulinum is, quote, "fun and easy to make," unquote, and he urges survivalists around the world to hone their skills, readying themselves for biological warfare in the coming Armageddon. That is from For the Record program number 324. That was recorded on September 9th of 2001. 9 days later, the anthrax attacks took place. And note the warning in that program that the possibility that fascist elements, postmodern fascists, right-wing extremists associated perhaps with underground Reich or international fascist elements might launch an attack against the United States. That turned out to be certainly eerie, if not altogether prescient under the circumstances. I would also note that in For the Record program number 407, there was an article about some of the strains, including some genetically altered strains, from Project Coast being offered to the United States for a certain amount of money, this for safekeeping, and to enhance the United States anti-biological warfare or anti-bioterror capabilities. That article is titled Vials Live On in South Africa, co-authored by Joby, J-O-B-Y Warwick, and John Mintz of the Washington Post. The version of that article, or the reprinting of that article, was from the San Francisco Chronicle of April 20th of 2003. Note that U.S. authorities, for whatever reason, did not choose to buy those particular samples, and they remain in private hands in South Africa. I would also note in that context that those samples from Project Coast continued to attract attention. From that article, in the past 9 months, the scientist has been offered money by a German treasure hunter and a man claiming to be an Arab sheik. Goosen, that's Dan Goosen, the Project Coast veteran. Goosen says he turned the offers down but worries about future bioterrorism. A small container of pathogens could kill 1 million people, he said. I would also note that the recently deceased Dr. David Kelly, a biological warfare expert whose death in connection with allegations, or whose alleged suicide in connection with allegations of disinformation by the U.S. and British governments in connection with Iraq, there certainly was some, certainly about the nuclear weapons program. But I would note that David Kelly was a very close personal friend of Tom Mangold, the co-author with Jeffrey Goldberg of the book Plague Wars that you heard excerpted at considerable length in that side of the program. In light of the fact that British intelligence was also aware of the Project Coast residua, so to speak, and had interviewed some of the people involved, one wonders if David Kelly, the late David Kelly, a good friend of Tom Mangold, who is quoted extensively in the media in connection with Kelly's death, one wonders if David Kelly knew anything about the Project Coast residua. That concludes For the Record program number 419, Side 2. Remember that both the two Larrys, so to speak, Larry Harris and Larry Ford, both tracked through Henderson, Nevada. So in a sense, for the two Larrys, all roads lead to Henderson. That concludes Side 2 of For the Record 419, looking back at the anthrax attacks being recorded on August 4th, 2003. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening.